Welcome to this episode of Flourishing Leadership. I'm your host, Guy Rogers, and our mission here is to help you unleash the full potential of your leadership calling. You can find out more about flourishing leadership at flourishing-leadership.com. My guest today is Doug Napier. Doug has 30 years of achievements in project development, operational optimization, finance, international operations, law, and organizational growth in for-profit and nonprofit industries. Doug is currently the president of the Cavan Companies, where as a team builder, he maximizes the talents and capacities of a strong and talented team to give a competitive edge to Cavan Companies projects. He's a graduate of the University of Iowa School of Business, Dallas Theological Seminary, and the University of Iowa School of Law. And on a personal note, Doug is a man of stellar character and mature wisdom, a valued friend whom I've sought out for his wisdom and guidance on numerous occasions. So thanks, Doug, so much for making the time, which out of a busy schedule, I know that you have, to join us on the podcast.
Thank you, Guy. It's a real pleasure to be with you on this podcast.
So as your bio notes, your background spans both the for-profit and nonprofit arenas, and I'm aware of what those are. And I know you've also practiced law in the past. How has this diversity of experience influenced your understanding of and practice of leadership?
That's a great question. You know, I look at my life in the rearview mirror and I see this kind of cumulative effect of all the experiences that I've had the privilege and blessing to be a part of. And it's always interesting as I look back to see that nothing's wasted. And you touched on some of the professional life that I've had, but I go back even farther and I look at those summers that I worked construction. I look at those years I worked in the pizza parlor in high school. And all of those things teach you something about how to relate to others, coworkers, bosses, customers. And everything adds into this whole experience of how do we best lead organizations, encourage others to come out with their best skills. So, yeah, whether it was law or nonprofit world or now in the business, on the for-profit business side, all of it has taught me a lot about life and business.
You know, that perspective, I think, is lost on a lot of our younger people today who don't see flipping burgers when you're 16 years old as something that is a profitable use of time because what you gain from it. They just want to jump right into things and have leadership things, and they don't go through that process. How do you think that's affecting where our culture is going, given these are our future leaders?
You know, it's interesting, Guy. When I've interviewed people, whether it's for an executive position or an admin position, and I'll get the same kind of resume that usually starts when they graduated from college. And I'll ask them, what was your very first job that you had that you made money at? And I'm always fascinated to find out whether it was, babysitting or shoveling snow or raking leaves or mowing lawns or had a newspaper route. It really tells you an awful lot about a work ethic, whatever they've learned through that process. And, I can't say it's an absolute rule, but so often I'll find one of these millennials that never had a job until they graduated from college. So they've missed out on a whole lot of that formation that I think comes from doing, manual labor, getting your hands dirty.
Right.
And I want to know in terms of their character, if I need them to do something that may be outside of their kind of typical job description behind their desk, I need somebody to help me change a light bulb or take out the garbage to the dumpster. What's the reaction going to be?
Right.
And part of it is they don't know how to do those things. They're just very limited in terms of their scope of skills. So I think it is an issue. And I commend everybody, go out and do something. And you figure out in the process what you like and what you don't like and what you might want to do the rest of your life and what you definitely don't want to do the rest of your life. And I know one of the things I learned doing construction is I didn't want to do construction the rest of my life. And now I'm in a real estate development firm.
just kind of in a different place for sure.
Different place. I'm not carrying the hammer and nails around.
So it's interesting when you talk about that, their first job. So my first job was at McDonald's when I was 15,
Yep.
making 160 an hour minimum wage. And
Ago.
what I didn't realize at the time was things that I was learning about leadership that only became clear to me much later in life. For instance, we had three managers, and frankly, they were obnoxious. They were older, but they were immature. And I didn't realize how immature they were and how they led in ways that were bullying and so on until later in life when I recognized this is not how a good leader leads.
Exactly.
But seeing that helped me to understand, okay, I don't want to lead this way because I'd been under the thumb of that. There's value even in working in situations where you have poor leadership that you're dealing with. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. My son's in the Army and he has that experience all the time. And he's now moving to become an officer. And I said, think about all the people that you really liked and take inventory of those characteristics. What made them effective as leaders? What did you like about them? And try to emulate those things in your life. And then talk about the drill sergeant that you didn't like and all the other guys. What sets them apart in a way that you don't want to emulate, and you want to be different than that as you become an officer and lead. And I think it's true for all of us. We pick up on both the positive and the negative experiences, and we figure out, what does a good leader look like? And most of us have somebody in mind that we want to follow their example.
Yeah, yeah. And if we don't have a takeaway from being under poor leadership that says, okay, I've learned something here in how I don't want to lead. If we don't have that, but all we have is a bitterness and an annoyance and a frustration with that, then we have wasted an opportunity, even in a situation where we're under poor leadership. That's what I hear.
I think people pick up on the bad habits and they feel like they've now got permission to be that kind of a bully leader as well. And they learn the wrong lesson. And so you have to be careful with that as well. And so, if I see somebody else acting poorly, that's what we would call a teaching moment or a performance improvement plan moment where you say, that's not how we act towards each other. I mean, I love the Ritz-Carlton. Everybody in that organization, they recite their credo every day, and we're ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. So attitude that comes from that and how we look at others, whether it's a customer or a coworker, a boss or subordinate, and say, we need to treat people with respect and dignity and kindness and patience while still accomplishing the mission of the organization. It's not permission to be sloppy. It's really a mandate to be excellent.
Very good. That's especially true for us who profess Christ. That is especially true for us. So shifting gears a little bit, without question, I know you would agree with this, there is such a growing polarization, a divisiveness, a growing negativity in American culture. It's everywhere around us. Yeah, and to be clear, Jesus' own words revealed who he was and the truth he proclaimed would be divisive, which would argue against the notion that we Christians should seek unity above all else at all costs, including sacrificing truth. But having said that, your career has demonstrated the value of cultivating and maintaining a strong, positive culture within the teams you have worked with. How should we strive for that in the midst of the divisiveness that is just so endemic in our culture?
Yeah, it is a growing challenge. I mean, we are called as Christians to be ambassadors, to be peacemakers, but we're also proclaimers of truth. And I think we have unfortunately fallen into this false dichotomy: is are we going to be loving or are we going to tell the truth? And they're not mutually exclusive. We are called to tell the truth in love. But sometimes we think, truth needs to be sacrificed so that we can demonstrate this loving attitude towards others. And in the process, we compromise truth. And I think it was Tim Keller who said that if we're only telling the truth, but we're not presenting it in an attitude of love, then we're just a shrill voice and nobody can hear us. If we are only being loving, but we're not telling the truth, then it's empty sentimentality. And I'm paraphrasing him, but I think that's the challenge. Now, part of the challenge too is we are in a world that's become, as you say, kind of more polarized and divisive. And I think part of that's because we're all great at talking, but we're not all great at listening. And what I've always tried to do with my teams is say, look, good ideas can come from anywhere. You all have a voice. I want your input. I may have to make a decision, but when we involve them in the process and we hear their ideas, it really goes a long ways. And I don't expect everybody to agree with me. I don't want everybody to agree with me. I want pushback and challenge and robust debate. But there is a threshold of we have to show respect to each other, and we got to listen to each other.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of that also comes from developing a culture of trust where you spend time to get to know each other. One of the things I do with my team members is I rotate them through and we do team member highlights at our team meetings so that people understand we're more than just what we do when we get to our office. We have lives outside, we have families, we have family history, we grew up, all these things that shape us. And when you get to know the person rather than just the soundbite, it goes a long ways to building relationship and a culture of trust. And then you have the freedom to disagree, but not be disagreeable.
I like that. I like what you said about developing a culture of trust and what you said about listening.
Yeah.
I mean, so much of whether it's social media or discussions, disagreements, it just seems like more and more we're talking past each other. There's no listening. We may not agree with that, but there's hearing, but not listening. And that's a challenge. That there really is a challenge to be a good listener.
To be a good listener with an open mind, but if nothing else, especially as Christians, we can't operate out of a position of fear. We'll hear lots of ideas that conflict with our Christian biblical worldview. But, as my friend John Stonestreet often says, outrage is not a strategy. For us to respond with outrage rather than, looking at a person, I used to tell my team and working for the legal organization that, our job is not to beat the opposition. Our job is to rescue the opposition. And when we got conflicting worldviews, so often we see them as a threat rather than an opportunity to, get them to a place where they can have their eyes open to the truth and come into, the world that, but for the grace of God, we wouldn't be in. So, right. You have to change your mindset. And so you don't see everything as opposition, but an opportunity to have civil discourse, to have a civil discussion and exchange ideas. Now, sometimes the world isn't patient with that because, they've made up their mind. Don't confuse them with the facts.
Right.
But that's when we decide, okay, this conversation needs to end and we're going to move on.
Right. That's exactly right. So in this vein, it brings to mind another question. And that is, okay, in this cultural milieu that we're in, which I don't think it's overstating to say it's not only post-Christian, but in many respects has become anti-Christian. That's the cultural milieu around us. That's the reality. Yeah. Let's not soft soap it. But in this cultural milieu, then, what would you say is the greatest leadership challenge facing the Christian believer who is out in the culture, out in the marketplace?
Well, I think part of it is maintaining an authentic position of being salt and light. It's easy to get frustrated. It's easy to react. It's easy to throw up our hands and think that there's no hope. But I think we have to be grounded as Christian leaders in what we know to be true about the sovereignty of God, true about the goodness of God, true about the wisdom of God, that we don't need, as I said, we don't have to react from a position of fear. And I think that we need to, walk through it. We have to walk into it. Sometimes we maybe have to walk away from it for a little while, but we just have to recognize our calling has not changed. Our environment may have changed. The tone and the volume of the opposition may have increased, but, all things are possible for us and we shouldn't give up hope. I also think that on a micro level, as leaders, to continue to build into individuals, our coworkers, our subordinates, those around us, our customers, be an example, model the love of Christ without compromising the truth of Christ.
It's easy to say it, isn't it?
It is.
It's easy to say it. it's much harder to do it. And I think you hit on something that I want to pursue just for a moment here, and that is that our environment may have changed. America has never been as hostile to Christianity as it is today. It is a culture for all of its flaws and everything, but as a history, Christianity has been at worst tolerated, but there was a time when pretty much everybody went to church, right? And it didn't mean everybody was a Christian, but that was the milieu. And now we're at kind of the opposite end of that spectrum. And I'm wondering for our listeners what that means for us as we venture into this, knowing that it's not easy the way it was. It's harder now. How do we deal with that?
Well, I think one of the things is we always have to maintain the long view. And you can look back in history, you can go all the way back to biblical history and see that history does repeat itself. Christians were being burned at the stake and fed to the lions. We're not even there yet. It's a hostile environment, sure. But I would take today over Rome in 70 AD. So I think the other thing is with that long view is there's a local pastor who said something I always loved. He said, just remember, no matter how bad it gets, it can only last a lifetime. and it's so true. Tom Schrader, a good fellow Iowan. And, that's the long view, because our momentary affliction that we have to maybe suffer here is momentary. And our job is to be faithful ambassadors while we're here. And as difficult as it gets, we want to be an immovable force for good in the culture around us. And it does have an impact. And, we can whine and bellyache about who's in office and what people are doing, but we shouldn't be shocked when a fallen world acts fallen.
You're right.
And the gravity that we see that's right in our face, it's disgusting, it's painful. But I always think about Christ when he looked out onto the crowds and he had compassion. And can we cultivate that same level of compassion rather than repulsion? And it's hard. It is hard because, I don't want my kids exposed to that. I don't want my wife exposed to that. I don't want to be exposed to that. It is wrong. It's evil and it's palpable. But it shouldn't shock us, really, at the end of the day, because that's the fallen world.
I like what you said. We shouldn't be shocked when a fallen world acts fallen. Yeah. Just doing what comes naturally.
Yeah.
Just doing what comes naturally. And it's interesting what you said about the momentary affliction. So I have 4 scriptures posted above my desk that I look at on and off all day. Rejoice in the Lord always. And of course, and then it goes on. Pray without ceasing. In all things, give thanks. And the last one is, these are momentary and light afflictions compared to the eternal weight of glory. Yeah. It is a matter of continually having to go back and adjust perspective.
Perspective is everything. When I was in grade school, I came across this poem. In that particular time of my life, there were some struggles, but it said, 2 men look through the same set of bars. One sees the mud, one sees the stars. And we have to fix our focal point constantly and look up and see the Son of God as that bright morning star. Say, that's our North Star. That's where we're headed. And we want to bring as many people with us. And there's a certain element of humility in all of this that, we tend to think that we're behaving better, we're acting better than the world, but we also have to judge our own hearts. Does that create a sense of concern for the world, or does it create a sense of pride in ourselves? And once we sense that there's a sense of pride, we need to arrest it as quickly as possible.
So I want to wrap this up with a question that gets to a more positive note, if you will. Apart from Jesus, who would you name as a hero of leadership to you, and why? That's a tough one, I know, because we could list a lot of people. But who would you name as a hero of leadership, and why?
I've been blessed to be around some great people and some great models of leadership. But I would have to say that the person that comes to mind here is Alan Sears, who was the founder and president CEO of Alliance Defending Freedom. And I had the privilege of working with Alan for 12 years. And the reason I say Alan's years is because when I worked with him and watched him closely, you have a lot of organizations out there who've been founded by great people, and often they get centered around their personality and their identity.
Sure.
And Alan was very careful not to do that because he wanted this organization to succeed and continue long after he was gone from the organization. But the other thing that I really liked about Alan was his whole philosophy of leadership was to make stars of others. And he wanted to invest, and he was never threatened. He said, I want to hire people smarter than me and more competent than me, people that, could run this organization better than me. And it was just, a true leader who is a servant leader understands how to make others successful in what they do and bring them up. And Alan was just so effective at that. He did such a marvelous job of making stars of others.
It goes back to what I said earlier about what we learned from leaders that aren't good leaders. I worked under one years ago who was highly insecure.
Yeah.
And oh boy, it was like a virus. And then I worked around others who are secure. Really, I've wanted to emulate that, because if I'm secure as a leader and I'm bringing people around me I want to do exactly what you just said making stars of others. Everybody, it's like the rising tide lifts all boats, and it creates a chemistry in the team. I ran an organization years ago where one of our $100,000 donors asked me a question. He said, "How many staff do you have?" And I said, so I thought for a moment, "We have 8 full-time, 2 part-time." And he looked at me with astonishment and he said, "How are you doing all the things that your organization is doing with such a small team?" And I said, "It's the team chemistry. There is a team chemistry here where the total is greater than the sum of the parts. Everybody is rising. And people are reaching their full potential." It's why I do leadership coaching, Doug. The opportunity to help people rise to the potential of their leadership calling. And unfortunately, there is not nearly enough of that out there in the world of leadership, even among Christian leaders.
Yeah, Jim Collins and others have written a lot of books on leaders and what that level 5 leader is. And,
right.
and usually that quality is humility. They don't read their own press releases. They understand that their feet are made of clay like everybody else's, and they serve and they want to serve. And I think it is a great quality for us to try to build into our own leadership styles. I'm a big fan of Patrick Lencioni, who talks about the importance of culture. And I think it was Peter Drucker that said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And if you don't have a positive culture, you can't accomplish the mission. And so I spend a lot of time with my team just reinforcing a positive culture. And if you've got somebody who's toxic, they've got to go.
Right.
Because it's going to slow you down. I don't care how competent they are. Nobody's irreplaceable.
Right.
And, with Alan, I thought, I don't care what you ask me to do. You're a leader that I will follow to the ends of the earth, because I trust your character. I trust your leadership. I trust your motives and your intent. And I know that you have a heart for the mission. And so when you've got that kind of level of trust, you have an effective army. And that's what I try to do with this team here. I don't try to get them to salute me. I want them to feel good about what we're doing, and that they're a valued part of the team, and that their contributions are recognized, and we celebrate small things and big things, small achievements and big milestones.
That's so good, Doug. And this has been such a worthwhile conversation. And I want to thank you again for taking the time to join our listeners today. It's been a pleasure.
Well, it's my pleasure to be with you, Guy, and I wish you the best. And hopefully this is helpful.
It has been. As a certified professional leadership coach, I have the privilege of working with leaders of all ages and backgrounds: C-level executives, nonprofit leaders, small business owners, self-employed professionals. I'm passionately driven to help each of these men and women be better servant leaders every day. In this podcast, my goal is to help you do the same. That's my calling. That's my mission. If this message today speaks to you, please subscribe to this podcast. by searching Flourishing Leadership with Guy Rogers on your favorite podcast app, or you can find it on youtube.com/the @Flourishing Leadership, youtube.com/@Flourishing Leadership. That's the YouTube channel. And please let your friends and colleagues know about it. And check us out at flourishing-leadership.com, where you can learn more about my leadership coaching approach and methodology and how it can help you, and also where you can find all of the podcast episodes. Because today, your leadership, flourishing leadership, has never been more needed.